Hi everybody. Today we're going to talk about perfectionism, and as you may remember from week 6 when Dr. Wren was talking, research hasn't found that gifted children exhibit more perfectionism than their peers, but because perfectionism is so often kind of associated with giftedness, we wanted to address it in this course, and one reason that we kind of might see this association with perfectionism in the gifted population is that it can tend to happen around academics among this population, because if you aren't in a challenging, rigorous environment and you're gifted, you're more likely to reach levels of perfection early on, and then that might become an expectation for yourself or that others have for you. So we want to so we're going to address it and kind of what perfectionism looks like in this gifted population. So the readings for this week, we're going to read chapters 1 and 2 from the book Letting Go of Perfect, and we've provided the entire text is in perusal if you wanted to read that. Also is also available for purchase if you ever want like the actual hard copy of the book, but again you have access to the text through the course, and then there's also a PDF of a shorter article by Dr. Allison. So I want you, when we think about perfectionism, just pause the video for a minute and think of a child that you know who exhibits perfectionistic tendencies. It could be your own child or a student that you've had in class, or even a character in a book or a movie. Jot down those characteristics that come to mind when you think of that child. And feel free to share in perusal before watching the rest of the video or doing the readings this week. So this video is also posted in perusal. So what kinds of things did you mention? Did you mention a child who makes really like straight A's and is always top of the class, or did you mention a kid who starts over all the time and crumbles up their paper and gets really frustrated, or did you mention the child who has trouble like in the third picture of even of making a mistake even in something like drawing on the walls, and is just really exact and has trouble letting go and maybe even having fun. When we sometimes authors distinguish between healthy and unhealthy perfectionism. In fact, that is a paradigm that in the first edition of the book that Dr. Allison and I wrote together, we adopted that dichotomy. However, seeing as how when you mention perfectionism in conversation, it's generally thought to be something negative. And perfectionism is this setting of unreasonably high expectations, including an intolerance of mistakes. So we really decided that perfectionism, we really don't think it can be healthy, but now we've defined it as perfectionism versus kind of this healthy motivation and goal setting. So for healthy, in a healthy world, in a healthy sense of self, we have high yet realistic standards. That might be, going to college or achieving your best, but perfectionism would be unrealistic standards. And of course that's going to vary from kid to kid based upon ability and achievement. But for example, for one kid, a high yet realistic standard might be AB honor roll. But for another kid, I mean, the high yet realistic standard might be getting all A's, but perfectionism would look like getting all 100s and never dipping below that A+ level, right? In a healthy child, we gain pleasure from working through hard and difficult tasks. So we're presented with a challenge, and that is motivating. In perfectionism, we're unsatisfied with that high level of effort, that we're never quite good enough. That effort maybe shows that we're not good enough because we had to struggle, and it warps our sense of self. In healthy sense of self, we're capable of choosing to relax our standards depending on the task. So that would be something like, well, if I'm going to turn in a rough draft, then I know it doesn't have to be perfect. I know that there'll be mistakes in it, and that's okay. Or if I'm doing practice, or if I'm even in my homework, it's okay for me not to get every question right, versus a perfectionist where it's really difficult to make a mistake. It's really difficult to turn in a messy copy or to turn in, a rough draft. In a healthy sense of self, motivation is based upon my personal standards and concerning my work effort. So I'm motivated based upon what I consider to be to do better than myself maybe the next time, or based upon what my expectations, versus perfectionism, which is largely based upon an external evaluation. So I have to make an A, I have to please my teacher, I have to please my parents. In healthy motivation and goal setting, we're looking at a mastery-oriented sense of success. So it's about, did I accomplish something? Did I meet the goals? Did I meet, did I get better at something? Versus perfectionism, which is performance-oriented, which is more about, did I get first place? Did I get an A? Was the end result perfect or good, versus was the process good? And healthy is being conscientious about my work, versus perfectionism, which is more, it stems from a sense of low self-esteem in general. So we want to reframe a student who's kind of suffering from perfectionism or has perfectionistic tendencies from, rather than striving for perfection, we're really striving for something like excellence. But so we're not saying like the motivation you have is bad. We're saying we want to just reframe this as something healthy, because when we have this healthy motivation where we see improvement through revision and practice, we see healthy goal setting, we have motivation to improve one's abilities and skills, and we have a real sense of pleasure from the efforts of painstaking effort. And I really like that last quote, because what we're really saying is I worked hard and I have a sense of achievement from it. Not because I got first place, not because I got an A+ on the assignment, because I worked really hard and I'm proud of what I've done. And that's the kind of sense of accomplishment that we want as adults. It's the kind of sense of accomplishment that we want our students and our children and people to experience in life. So what we found is that people who have healthy motivation and goal setting have, higher levels of improvement, higher satisfaction with all aspects of their life, more positive peer relationships, more pride in their work, lower levels of social stress, less shame and guilt. And this is kind of just in contrast to perfectionists. So some negative consequences of these perfectionistic tendencies. So perfectionists tend to focus on their mistakes rather than their achievements. They tend to have a strong fear of failure, which leads to procrastination. We can also see underachievement among this population. So we might not take the risks that we want to take, or we would like to see kids take because of their perfectionism. Or workaholic tendencies, so that they might spend an inappropriate amount of time doing their work. Dichotomous thinking, this is a big one. It's kind of like you either did good or you failed, and there's no middle ground. Either you're perfect or you're abject failure. So it's the kid who comes home with an 89 and is like, Mom, I failed my test. Well, literally an 89 is not failing a test, right? But in their minds, if I didn't get an A, then I failed, right? A concentration on those external rewards, getting first place, being the winner, being at the top, getting an A, those types of external things. They experience greater levels of anxiety, and minor mistakes are generalized to an overall low sense of self. So something like, oh, I missed a question on my math test. I'm terrible at math. I'm just not a good mathematician because I missed that question. So we're overgeneralizing some sort of minor misstep, or even I got a B in math. I'm not a good mathematician, and this is rather than having that resilience to kind of overcome those kinds of things. So some of the research on this unhealthy or perfectionistic traits, we know the psychological effects are things like for athletes with perfectionism, we see greater levels of anger, excessive worry, psychological distress, including greater levels of anxiety and depression. It can lead to eating disorders and even suicidal thoughts. Physiologically, we see headaches, greater levels of fatigue, poor health, greater alcohol consumption in college. And it tends to increase over time. So something that starts off in kindergarten, first grade can snowball and get bigger and bigger and bigger, and become a bigger issue as we progress through high school and college, especially for students who are in kind of high pressure situations in schools. And I think that one of the trends we've seen in secondary schools and in colleges is this need to put our advanced students into really high pressure junior high and high school situations where we see kids taking an enormous amount of AP classes or our IB programs or early college programs that just put an enormous amount of pressure for kids to be perfect, that you have to have, at my daughter's school, I think she had above a 4.5 GPA and she was still in the bottom half of her class. That's just an incredible amount of perfectness we're asking our kids to do. And so we can see how this can be very situational for our advanced kids when we're putting them in these types of environments. And I know a lot of you are psychology majors and are thinking about these kinds of things in grad school. And I want to say, this is the type of clinical presentation that we'd be really worried about. And for my undergrads in here, these are the kinds of things that as we're building a school, as we're building educational practice, we want to think about how, while we want to provide challenge and rigor for our students, we also want to think about what are the social costs, what are the psychological costs of high pressure environments, and can we provide that rigor and that challenge without causing these negative outcomes. We also kind of talk about that, we'll say a child's a perfectionist in kind of common parlance, but no one's a perfectionist usually in all parts of their life. So there's a lot of research on athletes and perfectionism and the perfection that we require from an athlete, like a lot of gymnasts, for example, and that that's a lot of the research on eating disorders in gymnastics has a lot to do with perfectionism in getting a perfect 10, right? So we tend to see so in the gifted population, again, we see that perfectionism kind of come out through the academics, through school, but you might see it maybe only in math class and not so much in English, or vice versa, right? Or sometimes it's across all subject areas, but it might only pop up in some places. So sometimes we refer to it as perfectionistic behaviors or tendencies rather than kind of labeling a kid as a perfectionist all the time. That also helps us reframe the issue so it's not part of a student's identity or a child's identity, it's part of a behavior that we can change, right? So some general strategies that we might use in the classroom as a teacher are, so one thing is we have this crisis moment. So we have this moment where the kid it's bubbling over, right? That we cannot, that they cannot create that perfect thing, whether it's when they've gotten the feedback and they're just upset, or the project's due and they see a mistake, or they just haven't had enough time to make it the way that they want. I know as a parent, I see this the night before a project's due, and my child is very, very overtired, and we have to finish the project that night, and it is a crisis moment, right? So the first thing we have to do is deal with the emotions, right? And remember, a child's identity is caught up in this, and this idea that they shouldn't make mistakes, that they're a smart kid, and that in order to keep this identity of being smart, they don't make mistakes, right? So these emotions are real and they're strong. So first thing we have to do is help them calm down, because nothing will be accomplished when we're in the middle of a meltdown, right? So, and at all ages, this is going to happen in high school, this happens in college, this happens in preschool, right? So we're going to find a quiet space. We're going to give them some calming breathing exercises. That mindfulness techniques are going to help them calm down first and center. Then we're going to help them make a plan, right? So if the project's due tomorrow, we're gonna have to rethink. A lot of times, with my children in particular, it happens to be that they have maybe not started the project yet, and it's due tomorrow. So they're not going to be able to do this elaborate idea that they thought they might have wanted to accomplish when the project was first assigned. We have to rethink what are our must-dos and what are our would-like-to-dos. If there is a mistake that needs to be fixed, perhaps on a project, we can create a plan to fix that mistake. We're going to talk about all of the things they've accomplished in this project rather than that tiny mistake, but we also might think about ways we could fix it or problem solve with them. And we're going to keep them focused on the immediate situation in the work, and helping them identify areas of pride. This is not the time to start with the student on giving them a lecture about how they should have started earlier, or how we could have planned better, or all of those things. Those lessons need to come, and those are skills the student needs to address. But at this moment, that won't help the situation. We want to get them through this crisis moment, and then later, our gifted student, our advanced student, is going to be able to be really reflective and think about how they could have changed it, but this isn't the time to do that. So some things we can do in the classroom to help with perfectionism, especially if we see a lot of it happening with our students. We can use teachable moments from our own lives and small examples for our students. I make lots of mistakes as a professor, you've probably noticed, right? And I admit them. I know I'm not perfect, and it's important for me to represent that to my students. It's like, yeah, I messed up, and I made a mistake, and show my students that it's okay in this space, in this classroom, in this environment to make mistakes and admit them and move on, and we forgive each other, and we accept each other for who we are. We also set goals, so and really achievable goals along the way. So what can happen is there's a big project due, and my student really wants to do a good job, and they have big ideas for it, but because it's so big, they want it to be perfect, they're afraid to start, because once they start, they might mess it up. Or it just feels so big and overwhelming, we don't know how to break it down into small achievable goals yet. So that goal setting can help them do small things to reach that bigger goal. Time management, again, and planning is going to help them not wait till the last minute, hopefully, and doing as much as you can in the classroom to help them work through those things. And really talking to them about healthy goal setting versus perfectionism is also a way to help them reframe their thinking about themselves. So again, and when you're thinking about parents, and if you're working with them in a clinical setting, these are conversations you can have with families, or maybe you have a kid at home and you're like, what do I do? Or if you're a teacher and you want to share these strategies with your students, or if you're a school counselor and you're thinking about ways to help the gifted families in your school. One of my big things is celebrating when things are finished, what's learned, rather than when you get the grade back. So when my kid turns in the project, or right before they turn it in, we look at that project, we reflect, we celebrate that learning that happened and what a great job they did. And then when the grade comes back, it's inconsequential, because I tell them, that teacher's opinion of what you did is less important to me than what you learned by doing it. Because that is just a person's opinion, and what really matters is the work you did and feeling good about the work you did. Again, it's that modeling of mistakes, doing things as a family that no one's good at. My favorite thing in the car to do is to sing along to the music, and I am the world's worst singer, and my kids let me know at every opportunity, trust me, but I'm modeling to them that I can enjoy something that I am not particularly good at. And it's okay. It's okay for me not to be good at something, and we're going to have joy in that. We also kind of find examples of flawed heroes, and we talk about them, especially when the kids were little. You know, we'll watch a movie and we'll talk about how, you know, that was a really dumb thing that that character did that you love, you know, and look at that, we still love that character, and this character still came out on top at the end, even though they made a mistake. We also create a space in our family where it's okay to take risks. It's okay to try new things. It's okay to fall. It's okay to fail. It's okay to, and you're going to find unconditional acceptance in our family. And this one was hard for me as a parent. There were times when, you know, my kid would bring home a test or something, and they would have gotten, you know, a B on it. And I would be, my first initial reaction is, oh, what did you miss? And I have to stop myself every time, right? Because I don't want to focus on what they missed. I want to focus on, look how much you learned. You got 85% of this test correct. Why am I going to focus on that 15% you didn't? But that's our instinct as parents sometimes. So we have to really retrain the way that we talk to our kids as well, to focus on those accomplishments, to be proud of what they bring home, to be proud of what they've learned. And then also, and I'll say, you know, and the big thing too is for parents, to be empowered to get help, to find a therapist, to find a mental health counselor, to connect them to those resources in the community. I think that there's a lot of parents who, especially among the gifted population, who will hear among the parent blogs, among some of the gifted publications that, well, perfectionism is just a characteristic of being gifted, or that anxiety, that depression they might feel, that's just a characteristic of them being gifted. And I really want to communicate to parents that no, depression, anxiety, perfectionism, these are all things that can become clinical. These are things that parents should feel empowered to get help for. So we need to make sure that they're connecting with those mental health professionals in their communities. You know, and it's great if we have one that understands giftedness as well. But the most important thing is that they find someone they can communicate with, that listens to their child, that they have a connection with. And so this is a quote from one of Dr. Adelson's students when she was a teacher, and it says, really, the only way to overcome perfectionism is to accept it and constantly tell yourself that it doesn't have to be perfect. Over time, with the maturity of growing up and the consistency of your corrections, it'll even out. And I really love the insight that this gifted kid has about their own progress towards mental health. And I think for me, what it highlights is one of the really beautiful things about working with gifted kids is they understand and they can comprehend and they can reflect about themselves. So when we see things like perfectionism kind of popping up with gifted kids, we can also use their intellect, we can use their advanced skills to help change those behaviors and to help them be reflective about their thought processes.